Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing on the slight risk that could impact portions of South Texas into northern Mexico. This is actually the old day one outlook, and we just updated the new one at the Storm Prediction Center, and it did pinch off that slight risk just a little bit more closer to Mexico, and that's not surprising because that cold air is winning out, surging off to the south across western Texas, acting as more of a density current, and I'm going to show you that on the surface map and on the RAP analysis, how it's basically sloshing south as a more dense, colder air. This often happens in the early spring across the southern high plains where you get that barrier jet surging south just to the east of the higher terrain, and usually that can act to pinch off those warm sectors just a little bit. I do think that the tornado threat is quite marginal today. It does look like there is a non-zero tornado threat across portions of Mexico just to the west of the Del Rio area. If I were to target anywhere and crossing borders and the pandemic was not an issue, I would cross into northern Mexico and target this area just off the mountains. I would hope that there could be a mesoscale low-level jet just east of those mountains in northern Mexico there as you get some pressure falls off to the west. I do think that this mesoscale low-level jet possibly exists here a little bit in northern Mexico, but I do think it's above the 850 millibar layer, maybe a little bit closer to 750, 800 millibars. That's probably why you can't analyze it a lot of times. But it is possible that this mesoscale low-level jet feature here could enhance the low-level shear just enough to get a non-zero threat of a tornado across northern Mexico just to the west of Del Rio. It is possible, too, that those supercells could cross the Rio Grande near the Del Rio area, maybe even a little bit south of there. And it is possible that there could be an isolated tornado threat with any of those supercells, but they would require a mesoscale accident. So they would require a little bit of an enhancement of that low-level flow just to the east of the mountains, but it'll be exciting to watch this play out. I've always wanted to intercept one of those supercells on the other side of the Mexican border. They often develop late at night, but usually these barrier jets or these density currents that surge to the south, basically very strong cold fronts, and the upper level pattern is a little bit diffuse. Usually these will lead to major busts down in the Del Rio area as that cold, stable air surges off to the south, leading to more of a stratus deck type of a situation. Here's the upper level pattern, and it is diffuse, as I mentioned. It's not that classic big open wave that comes in that really dominates the western U.S. It's just a little bit decoupled. Here you have the subtropical connection. That's the subtropical jet. And then here you've got the polar front jet stream. And this is the parent trough there and the polar front jet. And they never really phased. Usually, so far this spring, this system will come into the Pacific Northwest. It'll phase early with that subtropical jet, with that shear vorticity on the south side of it, causing that system to dig. And then they'll dig across the southwestern U.S. Sometimes they'll cut off, and then they'll eject across the central and Dixie Alley areas. Sometimes they'll shear off a little bit early, which will decrease the low-level shear and decrease the severity of the outbreak downstream of the mountains. But in this case, it's completely decoupled. You've got your trough up here, which is kind of zonal. It's got most of its flow on the front side, so it's not digging anymore. You've got another system coming here that looks pretty weak, that's not going to be soon enough to really cause this system to dig and phase with the subtropical jet, which would lead to a more substantial severe weather threat. That's how we've had kind of a marginal severe weather day these last few days. We had a big time storm system that's departed, and now the atmosphere needs to breathe a little bit, recoil, and I do think that next system around April 9th and 10th is going to be pretty substantial. Going into the middle part of April, I think that that's going to be a pretty active pattern. Still, though, there is a non-zero chance of severe weather across South Texas in association with this subtropical jet. You've got plenty of bulk shear in the deep layers between the surface and mid-levels and surface and upper levels to get some storm organization, and that's why you've got a slight risk that has been pinched off just a little bit to the south down here. But if the subtropical jet and the polar front jet were able to phase earlier, then you'd have this dominant wave that'll take over the western U.S. You'd have a big-time low-level jet out of front of it, which would enhance the low-level shear. It would bring that moisture northward, and then you'd be talking about a more widespread severe weather event across the southern plains and eventually Dixie Alley. But this system just isn't going to do it. You can see that it's a diffuse system when you look at the 850 millibar layer. Normally, if this were a big wave, you'd see a really thick low-level jet down there. We've seen it a few times this year. But really, you've got low-level winds weaker than about 10 to 15 knots. Granted, this is pretty close to the surface out here in northern Mexico, so if you look at the 700 millibar layer, and any mesoscale low-level jet would likely be between the 700 and 850 millibar layer. Here you can see this front. The cold air is deep enough to show up at 850 millibars there as that cold air is surging off to the south, behaving more as a density current. So you get this dense air that piles up against the mountains. These are the mountains right here, and it acts more as a barrier jet, surging off to the south, much further and faster than the models can often pick up on. Some of the mesoscale, smaller range models can certainly pick up on these barrier jets surging off to the south. But that's why the bust potential is often quite high in South and Southwest Texas with these types of setups. At the surface map, you can definitely see the dominance of that cold air surging off to the south. These are real observations here. You got temperatures falling into the 30s, dominating the Texas Panhandle. Very cold morning across portions of Amarillo in the upper 20s there. This is a big-time density current. So this is thick, cold, dense air here banked up against the mountains, surging off to the south, acting as a density current, barrier jet, more so than a cold front where you get a prefrontal trough and you get a frontal circulation. These up against the mountains just surge to the south because they're heavier air, it's colder, it's denser, slides in underneath that warmer air. Here you can see some untainted warm sector, dew points in the upper 60s to near 70, but a lot of weak low-level winds, and that's the case not only at the surface but also the low-level jet, so that's not transporting that moisture way off to the north. This is definitely a surface map where the cold front is dominating the warm air advection. Still though, with such moist air and some subtle upslope down here in northern Mexico, I do expect a couple renegade supercells to fire off the mountains. They will eventually make it to the Rio Grande because the mid and upper level winds are quite strong in the core of that low level jet. I just don't think that they're going to be producing tornadoes anymore. If they do produce tornadoes, it'll be right off the mountains and to the west of the Rio Grande. Then they'll become HP supercells or even line segments dominated by outflow themselves, and then they'll come across the Rio Grande River. Still though, I do think to the south of Del Rio, somewhere in this area, there is a non-zero threat that those supercells could make it to the Rio Grande, prompt a couple tornado warnings near or just to the south of the Del Rio area, but we'll just have to see if that transpires. This is the HRRR forecast CAPE, surface-based CAPE for 21Z or 4 p.m. Central Time. And look at this arc shape to the CAPE. That's how you could tell that there is cold air that is dominating it, pinching it off. Big northerlies, temperatures in the 30s, not warming up much out here. And basically this CAPE is getting squeezed along the leading edge of that density current or cold front that's going to be surging off to the south. You can see the hint at some supercell development that could come off the mountains, but really I think that the only non-zero tornado threat is in this narrow axis right here. The models are hinting at some raid cooled air as those storms develop off the mountains and junk out a little bit off to the east. But I do think that this instability axis that gets squeezed up against the mountains in Mexico is really the only chance for a tornado threat today. This is a 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index, which is a composite index of that 0 to 3 kilometer shear and CAPE, surface-based CAPE. And usually when I target the southern high plains, I like to look for these 0 to 3 kilometer shear and instability streamers that are going up into the mountains. This northern one here, though, is a little bit inflated because it's along the leading edge of the cold pool, and I think any storms that go up in this zone are going to be almost immediately undercut by that front that's surging off to the south. Some people were a little bit concerned about this environment, but the low-level jet just isn't strong enough, even to the east of the front, where storms may have a chance to move off that boundary. There's just no low-level shear. They're going to die out. It's just not going to happen. But this one streamer down here, this one right here that's going up into the mountains, you may know from our briefings when the central and high plain season is going that I like to track these 0 to 3 kilometer shear and instability streamers until they meet up with that higher terrain. And that's exactly what's happening here in northern Mexico. You've got one of those streamers feeding into it. You do have a cold pool that is being predicted by the HRRR, likely as storms try to go off the mountains here and junk out. You get anvil shadows, a lot of stabilizing type action right there. But that storm in northern Mexico, well to the southwest of Del Rio, to the southwest of that stable air pocket, where there is a little bit of a nose of some instability coming in, and one of those streamers where it meets up with the terrain. I do think that there is a chance for a decent supercell and a tornado threat in northern Mexico here, well to the southwest of the Del Rio area. And not surprisingly, the HRRR does have a storm developing right where that streamer meets up with the terrain. This one's probably going to be undercut by the front, to be honest. This front's going to be like this. You've got a lot of messy convection trying to move off the front, getting undercut, just nasty convection there. This is some older convection that develops on the Texas side, disorganized, borderline severe. This would be the target storm right on the end of that streamer, still in a bit of an instability axis coming in just east of the mountains. Maybe there's a mesoscale low-level jet. There is some enhanced flow between about 770 and 840 millibars that could squeak out just enough low-level shear for that storm to become tornadic. Late night tonight, it could get pretty close to South Texas, to the Rio Grande. It'll probably turn right quite a bit and do that and try to turn into that instability. But I do think that there is a chance for that storm to cross the Rio Grande into South Texas and at least prompt some severe thunderstorm warnings, maybe an isolated tornado warning. Northern Mexico, though, I think is the place to be. Let's now look at the RAP analysis. This is right now. Here is this density current surging off to the south. You've got some showers at the leading edge of it. Plenty of untainted cape developing here in northern Mexico, straddling the Rio Grande with these weak easterlies. This is about the area where that upslope will eventually fire some supercell storms. Looking at 20Z, the RAP is a bit more progressive. It shows those storms moving through northern Mexico off the mountains and actually crossing the Rio Grande near the Del Rio area at about 3 p.m. This seems a little bit aggressive. The HRRR seems more believable. Those storms junking out in northern Mexico and creating some stable air. But really down here is where I would expect there to be a non-zero tornado threat with these low-level easterlies swinging around to southwesterly at about 800 millibars just above the ground, and then eventually due westerly at the core of that low-level jet. Let's look at some of the effective helicities. So really marginal, even banked up against the mountains. You've got 50 to 100 effective helicities down there. And so unless there's a mesoscale enhancement of the low-level jet just east of the mountains there that we can't analyze between 700 and 850 millibars, I don't think that there's going to be enough shear for a tornado. But that low-level jet could ramp up closer to 0Z there in northern Mexico, to the northwest of Laredo, to the southwest of Del Rio. And so there is a non-zero chance of a tornado down there. But looking at 850, look at how weak the winds are. 5 to 10 knots out here, even though you do have some decent moisture banked up against the mountains. This is their season in Mexico, though. It's kind of like eastern Colorado during June and July, how you get some easterly winds, a weak low-level jet, and then those strong westerlies. This is northern Mexico's high plains insanity season, and there is a chance of a mesoscale accident, an isolated tornado there across northern Mexico. No one's going to be on it, though, so we're not going to know if it produces or not, but I do think that there is a non-zero chance of a tornado up there in northern Mexico into far southwestern Texas. So again, here's the SBC risk. I'm surprised that they expand the slight risk all the way to Waco and Austin, but I do think that it's been pinched off closer to Mexico now based on the dominance of that cold pool with the 8 a.m. outlook, which it should be. Maybe you could put an enhanced risk in northern Mexico if they did extend across the border there. But overall, a pretty marginal severe weather event. In the long range, though, around April 9 and 10, things are really starting to look interesting. How's it going, everybody? I'm just scrolling through, making sure everybody's doing good. Scrolling through the comments here. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to do these severe weather briefings as close to daily as I can for Facebook supporters. And then once I get back out in the field again, I'll stream live to everybody. And if there is a real substantial severe weather threat, then I'll stream these live briefings to everybody as well, just because it's important for everybody to know when severe weather may impact their area. And I'm also going to do an El Reno case study this weekend. I know there's been some requests for that. I haven't done the El Reno case study just yet, so we'll break down that event as well next time. Show you that west to east oriented boundary that happened to the west of Oklahoma City and the very strong shear and instability. Rosa, I'm going to start to do briefings on next week's chances this weekend as well, because I want to see if the European and the GFS models come into agreement. We did touch on it a little bit yesterday. We can look right now at the GFS, which was the more exciting model. This is the 6Z run. There's our system of interest here off the coast of California. The European yesterday cut this off and then didn't eject it and definitely had weaker chances. Different than this system though, look at the subtropical connection and this system interacting. So the current system stayed decoupled from the subtropical jet. This system interacted with the subtropical jet, dug down to the south, and then now is cut off just a little bit here. And the GFS does eject it around the 9th, so there is a chance that this could be a severe weather day first in the Texas area. You can see the subtropical jet connection. However, the system is cutting off, shearing out just a little bit. Now the GFS has this system over the Great Lakes dominating, which slows down the ejection of this system on the GFS. And then the 10th has some potential across Dixie Alley. And what this looks like to me is that the GFS has trended toward the European solution since yesterday. Yesterday it was showing a major outbreak, but now the GFS appears to be trending toward the European with more of a cutoff system, more of a sheared out ejection. And it looks like we'll have to wait for this system in the Pacific Northwest if this solution verifies. And this will be more active around the mid-April time period. So though, the April 10th looks like there could be a severe weather event in Dixie Alley. GFS though is trending down a bit. Let's see what the European model showed last night. 0Z run. And the European still has a more cut-off system, slower, weaker ejection, even weaker than the current GFS, but the GFS does appear to be trending toward the European. And boy, this looks like a pretty inactive pattern, but still got to watch this system closely. April 9, 10, 11, 12, right here across Dixie Alley. Could certainly be active. This is on the 11th. So the European does show this system intensifying just a bit. And areas across Dixie Alley on the 10th and 11th could be active. But still, just too much model uncertainty right now to discuss next week. But it does look like it's trending slower, weaker with that ejection. Oh, no! This whole time I didn't have my maps up. Dang. So I'll redo this discussion again. Sorry about that. Let's go back to the GFS. I can redo that, no problem. So the system cuts off over California. Here's the subtropical jet interacting with the base of the trough and causing it to dig and become decoupled from the polar front jet. Yesterday's GFS, though, showed this system ejecting a little bit earlier, a little bit faster, almost kind of picking up a little bit on this system, or becoming phased a bit with the northern stream system, and then ejecting on the 9th and 10th across Southern Plains and Dixie Alley. That showed a pretty substantial outbreak across the Southern Plains. Now, though, it looks like the GFS is trending more toward the European. Weaker system, still interacting with that subtropical jet. This stronger, more progressive system over the Great Lakes leaves it behind a bit, leading to a slower, weaker ejection of that system. But still the threat of severe weather on the 10th and the 11th southeastern Great Plains into Dixie Alley. This looks like an overnight event right now on the 9th into the 10th. But the GFS is definitely trending toward the European solution. It looks like the 10th and 11th could be an event there across Dixie Alley. Another kicker system across portions of the Pacific Northwest. The European doesn't show this, but this could be a reinvigoration of the pattern with the middle of April being a bit more active. But really the models are having trouble picking up this system. It's still offshore. It will be offshore for a while. And once it begins the cutoff process over California here and we start to get more information, then we'll increase the confidence of the forecast. The GFS has another system around the 12th, digging south across the west coast, out there around 10 days. If this pattern verifies, then the middle of April is going to be crazy active. And I do think that somewhere there between April 9th and about April 16th, there's likely going to be one or two substantial severe weather events. The GFS certainly wants to show this big time system here on the 13th ejecting, but it just is not being shown by the European model. What a different pattern. So a lot of uncertainty in the long range right now, especially next week, and we just need a little bit more agreement between the models. Sorry about that. Edie, Rosa, my bad, Cat. Sorry for discussing the models and not flipping it around. I could definitely do a daily kids science video about weather, Kathy. I'll take a look at my messages. You can do an educational video for kids, like talking about the general ingredients for severe weather. Keep it a little bit more simple than these briefings. But thank you guys so much for joining me this morning for this live briefing. I'm going to go live again this evening as those storms roll out of Mexico. We'll track them and see how well our forecast verifies with that instability and shear streamer meeting up with that terrain across northern Mexico, well to the southwest of Del Rio. So have a good rest of your Friday. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Stay well. And this weekend I'll be doing that El Reno case study, and we'll break down these long-range models quite a bit more. Never stop chasing.